Why, hey,
Laws they had, but these were few. Laws framed by wise men who watched the face of nature. Laws that were made as they watched cause and effect work out their ends in the lives of men.
In the spring of 1957, a fire spreading from house to house destroyed the community of Endadoon. The people of Endadoon needed to rebuild the houses to continue living in their homes. However, their band funds were held in trust by the Department of Indian Affairs. When the Kitsillas people asked for their money to rebuild their homes, the Department of Indian Affairs said, "No, this village is dying. You should all move to Terrace." They never rebuilt the village of Endadoon. It stands today as a memorial to the helplessness of a people controlled by a government not their own. For all these years, we as a people had no choice but to follow the dictates of the Indian Act and the Department of Indian Affairs. But today, we as a people have a choice we did not have in 1957. The door to governing ourselves is open. We only need to walk through. Today, we can be free to govern ourselves. The Kitsillas people have been involved in the treaty negotiations for nearly 20 years. One of the parts of a treaty that is a cornerstone to our self-determination is self-government. We don't have to wait until the Kitsillas Treaty is settled before we create a constitution and put our own government into place. Self-governments are currently being negotiated in virtually every jurisdiction across Canada, and today there are many First Nations in Canada which have their own successful governments in place. The reason that these nations are able to have their own governments is because of Section 35 of the Constitution Act, 1982, which states, "The existing Aboriginal and treaty rights of the Aboriginal peoples of Canada are hereby recognized and affirmed." This gives our people the authority to create our own constitution and to operate our own governments. Federal policies such as the inherent right of self-government policy enable this right. We are most familiar with the Nisga'a government, which celebrated 10 years of self-government on May 11 of 2010. The Nisga'a developed a constitution as part of their treaty agreement with Canada and British Columbia.
The Nisga'a Nation decided that self-government had to be part of our overall treaty. If you're going to be managing lands and resources, fish and wildlife, you need a government structure in place.
Under the Nisga'a Constitution, Nisga'a government has jurisdiction and authority on Nisga'a lands. This gives the Nisga'a Nation the ability to choose to what extent of that jurisdiction it will assume and when. That's the key. No one tells us when we're going to do it. We decide for ourselves.
The Indian Act no longer applies to the Nisga'a except for the purpose of Indian registration.
Nearly all of the 6,400 Nisga'a citizens reside in 4 Nisga'a villages and 3 urban communities. Their unique locations, far from urban areas for the most part, have compelled the Nisga'a to focus on resource development projects and the sharing of responsibility and privileges.
No chief was bigger than the other chief. It was always that we all had equal rights and equal holdings of whatever was settled upon in our treaty.
West Bank First Nation is located near Kelowna in the Okanagan Valley of British Columbia. The nation has 680 members and is comprised of 5 reserves with a total of 5,306 acres. In October of 2003, West Bank First Nations signed a self-government agreement with Canada. West Bank now assumes jurisdiction for the majority of matters normally regulated under the Indian Act.
So the reason for going towards it was, and moving towards self-governing, was to look after our own affairs because it wasn't working under the Indian Act. We had hoped that by going down the path of self-government, we would slowly start to be able to have full decision-making authority to ourselves, and that's exactly what happened.
The West Bank Agreement is the first standalone self-government agreement in British Columbia, which means it is not part of a land claims agreement.
The nation has not yet signed a treaty, but continues to negotiate with Canada and British Columbia on treaty issues. One of the unique considerations of WFN's agreement is that there are approximately 9,000 non-native people who live on their reserve lands. West Bank's urban location has compelled them to develop a constitution and laws that largely focus on local economic development and on the individual rights and needs of West Bank citizens.
We can now take our lands, put a lease on it, and take it to the bank and borrow like you can off reserve.
The Nisga'a and West Bank First Nations have very different governments because their objectives and geographic considerations are unique to their own nations, allowing each to create a unique government that works for their own people.
Currently under the Indian Act, and without our government in place, the Kitsilahs have very little rights.
We don't have the same right to health care or education as other Canadians. We don't have civil rights, and we don't have property rights like the rest of the people of British Columbia. We don't have the right to our language. We don't have the right to our culture. We don't even have the right to define who our citizens are. Our Kitsilahs Band Council does a good job given the circumstances. However, there are times when the council may make what seems to be an unfair decision because under the Indian Affairs system, we are required to deal with each individual and each situation differently, rather than by a set of laws that will ensure everyone is dealt with fairly and equally.
They treat us like we don't have any brains. They treat us like we don't know what we're doing. They treat us like we're incompetent.
With regards to self-government, I'm quite interested in seeing that go through for Kitsilah's First Nation, mainly because it helps us define ourselves. So I'm really glad that we're able to have a say in how our future is going to look.
It would be much better for us to have self-governance where we do not have to always go looking to the government to enact to do anything on our own lands and have to wait that long waiting period where they make you jump through hoops.
Furthermore, the Indian Affairs system was devised to make every native band throughout all of Canada the same and does not consider the unique needs of our Kitsilahs people. And most importantly, this system is designed to prevent us from developing as a people and realizing our potential as individuals.
I really want to see this change, and the only way it's going to change is if we start looking after ourselves.
The long-term plan is to try to get self-government before treaty. That's really what we're trying to do. And we've negotiated with Canada and BC that if we do pass a constitution and form our own government, they will recognize it.
Because self-government is recognized as an inherent right, we do not need permission or federal legislation to create and develop our own constitution. We have the ability and the power to do so.
The Nisga'a people own and have control over all development on Nisga'a lands. They are paving their own streets, building 2 recreation centers, and are in the final stages of constructing their own Nisga'a museum. None of this has been done with Indian Affairs approval. A fiscal financing agreement with Canada is in place, which covers many budgetary needs, including health, social, and education programs, until Nisga'a resource development projects become self-sustaining.
Under the Nisga'a Treaty and in our communities, we have the ability to design any program that we feel will benefit citizens.
Nisga'a business ventures are doing well and sustaining much of the Nisga'a financial needs.
The Nisga'a Nation has created our Nisga'a Commercial Group. We've determined not to be left behind in the technological age, so we created Intel Communications, which provides the fiber optic and communications capacity for the Nisga'a Nation, and we're quite excited about that to see that continue to move forward. With the Nisga'a Nation no longer under the Indian Act, our sole responsibility for accountability is to our own citizens.
West Bank First Nation also has full jurisdictional control over their lands and resources and implements one of the most comprehensive set of community laws in Canada on reserve lands. It has a strong economy with over 100 businesses on the reserves, many of which are owned by their own citizens.
We are drawing a lot of business because we have accountable government. We've got 9 different banking financial institutions that have invested on the leased lands on our reserve.
Only the non-native businesses are required to pay a property tax to the WFN, which amounts to about $10 million per year. These funds cover many of WFN programs and services, such as water, homeowner grants, and education needs.
A number of the areas that we chose to continue through INAC were health services with Health Canada. With INAC, we continue to have deliver the social services on their behalf on a contract basis. We still apply to INAC for housing grants. We've saved that opportunity, but we go ahead and build housing anyways. The grant is just another opportunity under the capital piece.
If the Kitsillas people wanted to, we could catch up with these progressive nations and be in control of our own lives and destinies.
So what exactly is a self-government agreement?
A self-government agreement is an agreement between Canada and the Kitsillas people, which will be a legal and binding document to ensure our people have the authority we need to run our own government. An agreement will include the structure and accountability of the Kitsillas government, our lawmaking powers, financial arrangements, and responsibility for providing programs and services to our members. Developing our own government is work we have to do ourselves. Even though we can make use of work done by other nations throughout Canada, in the end, it is we who must make the choices and determine what will work best for us. Each one of us has our own ideas, concerns, and visions for the future of our people, and all ideas are important. However we design our government, the important thing is that we move forward, that we somehow find the best way together to create and implement our own Kitsillas Constitution. The first thing we must do is decide if we want our own government. We must then make a commitment to work together and create a constitution designed by our people, for our people. Other First Nations have proven that it can be done. They are enjoying the fruits of freedom that we, Kitsillas people, can enjoy. A constitution is a written record of the agreement the people make with each other on how they are to be governed. Every democratic government in the world has its own set of rules that their people live by. Democracies require a constitution which sets out who can govern the people, how they will be governed, what the rules are, and how order is maintained. In a democracy, the citizens create and approve their own government so that they can ensure safety and public order for their own people. The Constitution defines what powers can be exercised by the different levels of government. A democratic government is made up of 3 separate branches, which ensures that their powers are limited. The executive, which carries out the business of the government, the legislative, which makes the laws, and the judicial branch, which settles disputes. In Canada, the executive branch is comprised of the Prime Minister and his cabinet. The Prime Minister chooses his own cabinet ministers. The ministers can only operate under the laws created by their legislature. In Parliament, the laws are introduced, debated, and passed in the House of Commons, then passed in the Senate. Lastly, the Governor-General signs the law. Having these steps makes the government accountable to the people even before the law is passed. If a Canadian citizen violates the law, he or she is subject to the court system. The Supreme Court of Canada is the highest court in the land. The federal and provincial courts deal with criminal and civil laws.
The Nisga'a government makes laws in its legislative house, Wilpsayuklamiska. It is comprised of elected officers and representatives from their 4 village governments and 3 urban locals. Similar to the Canadian Parliament, it enacts laws allowed under the Nisga'a Constitution. The executive takes all its direction from the WSN and receives advisory input from the Council of Elders.
With us passing legislation and enactments and regulations, We are in control of our environment, our development, which gives our citizens access to resources that can create a better quality of life for them.
West Bank First Nations government is similar to the original band council structure, with the exception that they are carrying out the business of their own government.
Their chief and 4 councillors serve as both executive and legislative arms for WFN. However, it takes its direction from the membership. An advisory council, comprised of non-native residents, are permitted to address issues that affect them.
Members can have input at any time during the lawmaking process. Their concerns may also be brought forward at their quarterly meetings. The Niskaysum's government and West Bank First Nations does not have its own court system, but currently rely on Canadian courts for their needs. The most important thing about lawmaking is how laws are made. The best process for making laws is that everything must be open to the public. We have a huge job ahead of us to design our government.
There are many decisions we must make together.
First, we must define who we are as Kitsillas people.
In the Tsimshian Nation, we have about 5 founding groups that came from all over different parts of BC.
These 3 different types of groups of people are going to be the ones who own and accept and the constitution of Kitsillas people.
What do we need to govern? We need to govern our lands. We need to govern our way of life. We need to control our future. We need to create a new world for our children and grandchildren, a world where they have the freedom and the tools to make their own choices. We will need to decide, how do we pick our leaders?
And how often?
We need to find a way to ensure that we have fair and honest elections. We want our government to protect us, to build on our future, not on the past with a continuation of what we have now. One of the most important things we need to discuss amongst ourselves is what rights we should have as a people, because it is those rights we declare that our own government must respect. One of the main purposes of government is to protect the land and ensure it builds our economies so that we can create our own prosperity. In the past, we have lost our lands, and we do not want to lose them again. How can we make sure that our own government will not sell our lands? Our Constitution can spell this out. The difference between democracy and all other governments is that democracy operates through rule by law. The regulations that apply to us are not based on laws, but on someone's opinion, the Minister of Indian Affairs.
That is why self-government is so important to the Niska Nation. We are no longer under the Indian Act.
You know, such a big difference now. I don't have to go pound on the desk anymore to the INAC head and listen to the bureaucrat, tell me what I can or can't do as a member representing the band. Now those decisions are made at our table.
The most important thing self-government has done for the nation, it has given the Niska citizens a choice.
I would have to say that it is both empowering and provides an incredible sense of freedom.
After we've done all our work, we need to write it up in a document and all the Kitsillas people will vote on it. This will become our constitution.
Change is good. We often hear that change needs to happen, and people often become entrenched in how things are done and become comfortable and feel safe within a certain structure that we're currently under. And when you talk about change, people may be hesitant or afraid, but certainly I think that change is good, especially when it's something that's going to be developed by our own people.
What will having our own government mean for our people? It means that we will have the authority and the ability to tackle problems and come up with our own solutions. It means that as the Niskaysum's government and West Bank First Nations have done, we will have a unique government designed by our own people and based on the desires and needs of our own Kitsillas people. Today, we as a people have a choice we did not have in 1957. Canada and British Columbia have acknowledged we have the inherent right to govern ourselves. The door to governing ourselves is open. We need only to walk through. The raising of our pole marks the beginning of the long road we must walk to govern ourselves. We must walk on this road together.
So grew the code. So were the children instructed in the ways of right and wrong. So generation followed generation, each one more vigorous, more prosperous.